Hello everyone, welcome to Read Through the Word. Today is Saturday, May 24th. Today we are reading, our lesson today is called Temple Ideology in the Ancient Near East, and we are looking at 2 Chronicles chapter 7. Our key verse is 2 Chronicles 7:16. For I have chosen this temple and set it apart to be holy, a place where my name will be honored forever. I will always watch over it, for it is dear to my heart. So this expression of the Lord's being and love in this temple, not as a place to say, hey, here's where you need to follow all my rules, though there were guidelines, but a place for people to, a place for Yahweh's representation, for people to meet with him there, for a place where his name would be known. So very interesting, the variety of ideologies about temples and temple worship among different religions in the ancient Near East, and we're going to talk about some of them today. So in the notes, I talked about how there are, and we've talked about this a lot, there are similarities at times, many times, between what's happening in other religions in the culture of that time and in what's happening in Israel. So there are similarities because they're a part of that culture, but we always are able to find how Yahweh, how God, how Adonai is distinguishing himself as sovereign, as above, as over all other gods. So let's talk about that. There are some similarities between Israel and ancient Near Eastern temple ideologies. There's some similarities. One is that there was a belief that God would abandon that particular religion's temple because of certain offenses, namely ritual neglect. So that was a belief among Israelites and other religious temples. Temples were considered to be a picture of something larger. And from the IVP Bible Background Commentary, it said, a palace that paralleled the palace where the deity dwelt, either in heavenly places or in the heavenly mountains. So it was supposed to be a mirror, a picture, a parallel of an even greater temple where this deity resided. In worshiping the idols, the actual idol was not worshipped, but the deity was believed to be in the statue, the deity's representation in the temple. So these statues, these idols that were in various temples, were not specifically, the statue itself was not being worshipped. The idol itself, they believed that this idol or statue contained or was animated by a god. And so when, as we're going to read down the road here, as various kings of both Israel and Judah become corrupt, we end up with idols in the temple, false idols in the temple. And it's important to remember that the Israelites' sin, it was wrong, right? It was a blatant sin against God. But their crime, their sin, was not that they were worshiping the actual statue or the idol. Because, even back in Exodus, when they make the golden calf, they weren't worshiping the calf. They were worshiping the God that they believed was in the calf, the golden calf. So it was Israel's misunderstanding that their God, Yahweh, was different from all other gods, and that he would not reside in a statue, but among his people. Israel thought they needed a golden calf in order for God to be present, to have a representation of him. But Adonai was clear that he would be represented by the indwelling in his people. So it was wrong what they did, but they weren't worshiping the thing. They just thought they needed the thing because they felt like they needed this thing for their God to dwell in. And God continually taught them, don't worship an idol or a graven image, was probably more that commandment, because I'm not dwelling in this thing like other gods. I'm dwelling among you. So those are some similarities, though, that are important to know, that other religions were not worshiping the actual idol or statue itself, but the God that they felt was dwelling in that idol or statue. Okay, so what are some differences? We just talked about one a little bit, how God over time really began to try to kind of really get it in the Israelites' head. You don't need something for me to dwell in to worship me like. I'm everywhere. I'm with you, right? Okay, so we talked about that difference a little bit, that Yahweh dwelt among his people. His people, not statues, represented him. So these idols and statues were like these, pagan temples. They were supposed to be a representation of their God. And though God did have some representation of him in the temple, like, there was the Ark of the Covenant, there were things that were supposed to represent things about him. Ultimately, his representation was in the people who all bear his image. Another difference is how he talks about in 2 Chronicles, he says, my name will be here, right? And God's name represents an extension of himself. And his eyes and his ears and his heart, right? The spirit of those things were present too. Heart, by the way, in the Hebrew language is a very in-depth, multifaceted idea. I feel like much more depth than we understand it in English, that encompasses emotion, logic, reason, and even more than that. So there's a pretty deep, kind of more broad interpretation when we talk about the heart in the Hebrew language. Also interesting, in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14, he says, I will hear from heaven. So he's saying when people pray to my name, Yahweh is saying, I will hear from heaven. So that's different, right? So yes, we have this representation of God, in the temple that's similar. But the difference is God is saying, I'll hear you from anywhere, though. I am in heaven, and when you pray to me, I'm not just contained in this temple. And so I feel like this verse, these verses here that talk about his eyes and his ears and his heart being in the temple, and how he says, I will hear them pray from heaven. It's really giving this image of a very sovereign, omnipresent, overarching God that is not confined to a temple. And I think that's pretty awesome. So some really interesting similarities and differences there. And ultimately, when we look back at these things, what we can see and take from it for today is the idea that God chose people to dwell in. That we need not worship something that we think we need to have or do or see in order to connect with God. He's here. He's with us. And our representation of him is that we bear his image and we are to be his image bearers to the world. So when people see us, right? People should see a representation of who God is. Now, I'm going to wrap this up with a cool story. If you watched my video last Saturday, if you didn't, you might want to go back and watch it. If not, that's okay. But in my teaching last Saturday, we had to pull that video, some of you noticed, from the archive from 2 years ago. Why? Because when I was supposed to record, I had a whole series of things that just kind of went wild and crazy in my world. And I finally called Linda and I said, I'm not going to be able to do this lesson. And I said, but wait, I realized that if you go back to 2023, I actually taught the lesson on this day. And so, I felt really bad about it. And, because I like to always, teach what's being laid on my heart right now, And so anyway, she put the lesson up from 2023. Now, I have to tell you, the thing that blew up in my world that day was that my car, the car that I just recently bought, okay, it was a very cars are expensive. I just took what I had and bought something and prayed for the best, and within a week, that car was dead. This new car was dead. And I was absolutely distraught. I thought, how can you help? I mean, what am I supposed to do? I'm out of options. And if any of you watched last week's, you're already probably kind of laughing or chuckling with me. Because I decided, I decided a couple days after this happened, I thought, well, I kind of want to go back and watch, what did I teach on that day? So 2 years earlier, to the day, 2023, May 17th, I taught about my car that died. I am still just so in awe. I watched this video of myself talking about this thing that popped up in my world that caused total panic, that God swooped in and provided in a way I couldn't have even imagined. And when I watched it a few days ago, or, last weekend in 2025, I thought the exact same thing is happening to me right now. To the day I finally get this other car and it's dead. And I had just got it and, very limited budget. So I just thought, that is crazy. I mean, I couldn't believe that was the same lesson, and that was exactly what happened. And it gave me faith. I thought, oh my goodness, if God provided then, 2 years ago to the day, he's going to provide now. And sure enough, my car is fixed today because an anonymous person walked in to the mechanic that I go to and paid for my car to be fixed. Just like 2 years ago to the day, I had some precious friends who helped me get it fixed. And if that does not give a representation of how much God loves us and is involved and dwells with us, I don't know what does. And maybe in your world, there's something big like that, or maybe it's even on a scale that feels smaller to you, but I don't think it is smaller. Maybe it's something like God got you through another day when you didn't know how you were going to make it. Maybe it was God provided a conversation with just the right person that you needed to hear from today to increase your faith. Maybe you had an expense or a bill or something you thought was going to come short financially, and somehow it all worked out and it pulled through and God provided. Maybe it was someone who was there for you, who was unexpected and was able to give you a word that you really, really needed today. In other words, what around you gave you a picture, a representation of who God is? What person around you, what person or situation did you encounter where you saw so clearly God dwells with us? That God lives in his people, and he dwells in this world with us, so we don't have to do it alone. And the Israelites wanted and desired the presence of God, and the temple was so precious for them in that way. But as time went on, and especially when we get to the New Testament, they learn God dwells with us always. And that's the beauty of this idea. That's the beauty of the God that we worship. I just was so excited to share that story with you today. I hope it encourages you that God sees you, that he can use something very unexpected to provide, and that even if you don't see the provision right now, trust that he can show himself in others around you or in miracles that you don't expect. Trust that God is a dwell with us God. He's not hiding out in some idol, in some statue. He's with us. Thanks for joining me here today, friends, and we'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.